Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome to Adventures in History. Today's topic is a history of Latin America. Now, this is the area south of the United States. It includes Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. And primarily, the bulk of the former Spanish Empire and the Portuguese Empire. Many Spanish-speaking countries. Actually, Spanish is a very useful language because there's so many countries in which it is the national language. The Philippines is is one of the few, really the only, along with Guam, I guess, the two places where in the Spanish Empire where Spanish is really not the national language. So I think it's a beautiful language, and I studied in Spanish. I studied Spanish in college, and really, it's a very, very musical, Vamos a la fiesta, yeah, Viva Clemente, that type of thing. Anyway, so now again, when European contact really became extensive and long-lasting, beginning in 1492, when Christopher Columbus made his voyage across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe, and then the isolation of North and South America ended, and then there was a huge drop in population, maybe the most tragic event in history, because some historians believe up to 90% of the people in North and South America died because of primarily because of diseases that they were not immune to, or they had no immunity from. We just can't imagine. So this one some historians call the history of North and South America a blank slate. There's just so much we don't know, because with the deaths of so many of the people, so much was lost. What we do know is that when the Spanish arrived, and really was the beginning of the Spanish conquest, and Latin America is really dominated by this Spanish presence, Spanish Empire, that there were two great empires in Latin America, the Aztecs in Mexico and the Incas in Peru. And both were defeated by the Spanish. It's easy to be critical of the Spanish because of their greed and cruelty and so forth, and the violence that they inflicted on peoples in their empires. But, on the other hand, they were strong-willed people, and they were brave. They tried to do things that were unbelievable. The Spanish conquest of Mexico is just kind of, it's really, it seems crazy. It's just such a small number of Spaniards came and were able to defeat a population much, much larger. There were just a couple hundred Spanish soldiers, and they faced an empire of, probably millions. Of course, the thing is, there are different things, different reasons probably, and a large part is that the Aztec Empire was itself a slave empire, and there were people who hated the Aztecs. They were just a minority who had power over others. So when the Spanish came, these other groups thought, this is our opportunity, and they actually allied themselves with the Spanish. This is really world history. If you study world history, there are many small kingdoms, all generally at war with their neighbors, and everyone with their self-interest trying to expand. And then, when the Spanish came, you had these people thought, kingdoms, so let's join the Spanish and defeat the hated Aztecs. So that was a factor as well. The Spanish really had more. Well, there was some metal making in North and South America, not much. So the Spanish had these, steel swords that they really didn't have so much. Well, they didn't have guns so much, but these swords, which were very, very powerful in fighting, and the Americans, Indians had weapons made out of wood and stone. That was a factor as well. The Spanish had horses, which helped them to maneuver around a battlefield. And the other curious thing in Mexico is that they had these beliefs that the Aztecs that you can only fight a guy one-on-one. They could actually have at times they could have overwhelmed the Spanish, but they seemed like they were. One account they were sort of waiting in line to fight individual Spaniards and get killed. But they thought, no, you have to. It's not a fair fight if you overwhelm your enemy like 20-1, even though they had tremendous numbers. Now another. Excuse me, I have these muscle knots in my neck. But another problem with the Aztecs was their religion. They had these, they had pyramids, and they had these religious leaders who demanded human sacrifice, and they would eat human hearts. They thought it was really good to, cut out a guy's heart and eat it right were very fresh. It's horrible, and they'd have blood all over themselves. And so, when the Spanish came, they introduced Christianity. And the thing is, yes, we know that the problem with Christianity is Christians have not been Christian very often, because Christianity means loving God and loving people that you encounter in life. And of course, the Spanish, my goodness, they came and they were enslaving people, killing people, and that really wasn't Christian. But the ideals of Christianity were always there, and they've always been there to aspire to, and those ideals are very wonderful. Some historians have called Christianity the greatest civilizing force in history because it has encouraged people to have restraint and to have a conscience and to think about what's right. The right thing is to love and be kind, not to kill people and do whatever you want. So anyway, and another major factor in the Spanish conquest of Mexico was the large loss of life, and these religious leaders, the people they lost their credibility when they were started to be defeated by the Spanish. Now Hernando Cortes was the great conqueror of Mexico. It was kind of sad though, because the thing is with the Spanish. Yes, they had they were strong-willed and determined, and they wanted wealth and fame. One of the things they wanted actually was to raise money and to finance a crusade to capture Jerusalem from the Muslims, because by this time the Jerusalem, the holy city, where Jesus Christ died, had been long under Muslim rule, and the Crusades. Well, for a while they were able to succeed. This was a part of their motivation. In large part just because their human nature, I guess, to be the desire for wealth and fame. Now, the thing is, the Spanish, one of their major weaknesses, they did not have democracy or rule of law. Sort of might makes right. And so there was, a lot of political conniving, people making up stories. And Cortes, who had a vast fortune, they all wanted to go back to Spain. The Spanish, they would go to wherever in Latin America, Philippines, and achieve wealth through confiscation of gold and silver in the case of in Mexico and Peru, the Aztec and Inca empires, or through slave labor, which is horrible. But and then go back to Spain and live in a mansion and not have to work and be admired and have food and drink and money to buy stuff and women and so forth, and that's what they wanted. It's kind of a sad dream, but and Cortes, again, like I said, he didn't have rule of law, so at the end of his he lost everything. Some people made up a story that he was against the king or a traitor, and his wealth was confiscated, so he ended up a broken man. But I think that was actually his karma, the law, God's perfect justice. So anyway, and Pizarro, he was Francisco Pizarro was the conqueror of the Inca Empire in South America. So this vast empire, which the Spanish Empire, of course, went into what's now the United States, Mexico, Central America, into South America. Now and the thing is, these countries, which colonies, which became countries, Mexico and Peru had heavy Indian populations, despite the large loss of life. The Mexican people, really, most Mexicans are descendants. Are of mixed descent, Spanish and Indian, and there are pure Indians as well in Mexico. And in South America, you have in Bolivia large, Indians with their native original languages from going way back. And Argentina in the far south. Argentina is the largest country, probably almost largely European descent, Spanish, and in recent years, lots of German and Italian immigrants. Now, Brazil is interesting because Brazil has a very high African descent population because of African slaves that were brought across the Atlantic Ocean. We know about the ones brought to what became the United States, but the Caribbean and Brazil all received much more, actually. So there's a huge African descent population, African slavery in Brazil. Okay, so we're just taking a vast overview of Latin American history. You had the imperial years, the empire years in the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, and so forth. Brazil was a big one big Portuguese empire, and then the rest was pretty much Spanish from Mexico down to Argentina and through Central America and the Caribbean islands, Cuba and what's now Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. Although there were some others, the French in Saint Domingue, which became Haiti, and the British in Jamaica, the Bahamas, in the Caribbean, and Trinidad as well, and in Central America, actually, British Honduras, which is now Belize, and then strangely in South America, which is basically Spanish and Portuguese, you have these three small countries at the top of South America, the Guyanas. British Guyana, British colony, which is now Guyana, and then Dutch Guyana from Holland. It was now Suriname, independent, and French Guyana actually is still a French colony. Those the three Guyanas. So Latin America is overwhelmingly Spanish and Portuguese, but a little bit of English, French, and Dutch. Okay, so time was passing and into the 1700s, and actually they were, the Spanish extracted all this gold and silver from Mexico and Peru and brought it to Spain, but they just spent it. It really didn't help the country and ended up in Great Britain. They just bought stuff with it. But that was, they called it the Siglo de Oro, the century of gold, the 1500s, because later the British became more powerful and greater. So by the time the U.S. The American Revolution came, late 1700s, this really inspired, and these. When the 13 British colonies in North America fought for independence and achieved it from 1776 to 1783, this inspired the Latin Americans to do the same. And actually, the first was the slaves in Saint Domingue, in which is now Haiti. They became independent around 1804 of France. And then in the early decades of the 19th century, early 1800s, it was really the 1820s. The Latin Americans, the colonies, the Spanish colonies, fought for independence and achieved it. Simón Bolívar in South America, for whom Bolivia is named, was a great fighter against for independence for these countries. And then San Agustin down in Argentina, Bernardo O'Higgins in Chile. O'Higgins, he had an Irish descent. And in Mexico as well. So actually, all of these countries became independent by the early 1800s, 1820s, 1830s. Brazil a little bit later. Strangely, Brazil, the king of Brazil had political problems, King Pedro, and he moved to Brazil and became there had two kings for a while before they became. That was kind of strange, but anyway, so they became independent, and then they've had their political problems. They tried to become democratic like the United States and had all kinds of problems because they didn't have that tradition that Americans had from being English. The English had this tradition of democracy, rule of law, the use of reason, right, and rationality. They didn't have that. It was might makes right. So maybe they'd have elections, but then the loser would say, "Oh, you cheated," and then they'd start a civil war. All kind of horrific political problems in Latin America after independence, and lots of dictators, whom they called caudillos, all over Latin America, as the years passed. So this really sort of prevented Latin American countries from developing, and they still, things are much better now. Argentina, of course, Argentina had the famous Evita Perón, who was the wife of Juan Perón, who was a dictator. They made the famous Broadway musical about her with Madonna. And actually in Latin America, they're the great soccer players. Along with Europeans. The greatest soccer players in the world are European or South American, Latin American. Particularly Brazil and Argentina, the big powerhouses in soccer or world football. So anyway, time was passing, and they've had these political problems. And today, actually, Central America has horrific political problems with bad government. And actually, the problem is really with the drug trade. Sending drugs to the United States, cocaine and marijuana to the United States, really real problem because there's large sums of money involved, and it sort of has created a culture of violence, which has been very problematic. Brazil is Brazil is on its way to becoming actually, you could say, a powerful country, and has been overcoming its political problems. Cuba, of course, remained a Spanish colony until 1898. Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. And then Cuba became independent as a result of the Spanish-American War. The United States invaded and defeated the Spanish. So that was the end of the Spanish Empire in 1898. They lost the last four colonies that they had. And Cuba became independent, and Puerto Rico became an American territory, which it still is. Dominican Republic, La República Dominicana, and then the Philippines became a U.S. territory, and Guam still is. So, and then, of course, Cuba became communist and still is communist government under the Fidel Castro Revolution back in 1959, and had this long conflict with the U.S. because of that, because they adopted this radical political system. And then in Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, who died, but now they're having all kinds of political and economic problems there because Venezuela as well adopted radical politics, a radical government. Now Brazil, this huge country, which has the Amazon River Valley, or the largest tropical rainforest in the world, and actually the Amazon River has 20% of the world's surface water. Unbelievable, incredible. In Mexico had an American Indian president, Benito Juarez, and then into the 20th century, Mexico had a horrific civil war from 1910 to 1920, preceded by a pretty kind of a tough dictatorship, Porfirio Diaz, and then they after the Civil War, in the Civil War, they had the two great leaders, Emiliano Zapata and Pancho Villa. I met a Mexican guy in Guam, and I said, "Viva Zapata," and he said, "Como no," which means "Viva Zapata." Long live Zapata. He's the national hero in Mexico. And como no means, of course. So anyway, and after the Mexican Civil War, they had the Partido, the PRI, Partido, or something, or Instituto, now, and it was like a one-party state, like a dictatorship of that political party, although I think that has changed. Mexico is still very, very troubled. Yeah, really troubled by the drug trafficking, the drug trade, a real problem. You have drug addiction in the United States where there's money, and then it's coming from these countries where it's really very harmful to those countries as well. Now, so Mexico, hopefully things will get better. Now, the small countries in Central America, Guatemala, a large Indian descent population, again, very troubled. Honduras, is Honduras. El Salvador was really a battleground in the Cold War, a strong communist movement there. Nicaragua, which became communist, basically under the Sandinistas, they were preceded by Anastasio Somoza, who was a pretty bad dictator. You've had a lot of these Latin American countries have had dictators, and then you have communist rebels fighting them. And it seems like you should support the communists because they're the good guys, but are they really? It's kind of like it's like bad and worse. And then Costa Rica has actually done pretty well of all the Central American countries. They've had the most stability and good government and a pretty good economy. Now, Panama, very interesting. The Panama Canal, built by the United States, which connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Yeah, very, very, very important. So you don't have to go around South America by ship anymore. That was such a tough trip. The Tierra del Fuego down around going toward Antarctica. Very high winds where the two oceans come together. Always stormy, very dangerous, and a long trip. So the Panama Canal was an amazing thing that the United States achieved, an incredible achievement. Now you go into South America, we talked about Venezuela. They actually play a lot of baseball there. There's been some, here in Cleveland, we had Omar Vizquel from Venezuela. Colombia, another country sort of really traumatized by drug trafficking. Ecuador, named after the equator. Peru, as we said, the Inca Empire was there. Bolivia, landlocked, and a large Indian descent, really Indian population. Chile, interesting country, all long coastline in South America. Kind of a long, skinny north-south country. Yeah, they've actually done pretty well. They had the Allende, Salvador Allende was president, but leaning toward the left, and they were blaming his downfall to the CIA. Argentina, which actually was doing very, very well, but then they had severe political problems and a strong communist movement, but they're doing better today. Uruguay actually has done pretty well, small country. Paraguay, which is another landlocked country, although you can get there by water on the going up through by Buenos Aires up to the Rio de la Plata. And then, of course, Brazil, this huge country in South America. So all these different countries, they're very interesting. Times I kept closer touch back in the 1980s on what was going on there, and they all have their own stories. They're different histories. And Paraguay had this horrific problem. They went to war with like 90% of the men in Paraguay were killed in a war, the ABC war with Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. Very, very tragic. And actually, in I think it's in Peru, Lake Titicaca, the highest elevation water in the world, in terms of a body of water, lake, and it's up in the mountains. And then you have the Andes Mountains, north to south, going another major geographic form in Latin America. It's extending all the way from the Caribbean down to the bottom of South America. So anyway, it's all interesting, these different, and so that's why, I think anyone who's interested in speaking, learning Spanish, very valuable language, because all these people from these different countries, that's their national language, from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Panama, and all these, like you mentioned, Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Chile, and so forth. And of course, Brazil is known for Carnival. These are all Catholic Christian countries from the Spanish legacy. And actually, the Pope right now is he's from Argentina, I believe, with Spanish descent or Italian descent. Not sure. So it's interesting. The first non-European Pope actually ever. Argentina and. So anyway, I was thinking Brazil with the Amazon River. Wow, what a vast area with all these different animals and the rainforest and really something. So it's certainly Latin America is a country worthy of study. It's good to learn about these countries. In the Caribbean, La República Dominicana, Dominican Republic. A huge number of baseball players in the United States. Most of the Latin American countries, soccer is their game, but some of them it's baseball. Cuba, it's baseball, though now because of the communist era, the Cuban baseball players it was pretty tough for them to come to the U.S. Dominican Republic, La República Dominicana. Yeah, all kinds of guys from there who've come to the U.S. and become very successful, because that's the game they love to play. Puerto Ricans. We have a lot of Puerto Ricans here in Cleveland who've come to play. Sandy Alomar Jr., really tremendous player. And of course, the English-speaking countries are, we wonder, are they a part of Latin America? Because they're in the geographic area, but not culturally a part of it, because they speak a different language. The Jamaicans, they speak English, and they're African descent, and they have their own culture. They're connected to the British. The same thing with Bahamas and Trinidad, although Trinidad has a large a population from India and also from China as well, and off the coast of South America. And of course, the Jamaicans with reggae and Bob Marley. They're those songs like that was one of my favorite songs was Buffalo Soldier, which Buffalo, stolen from the lines from that song, stolen from Africa, brought to America. It's referring to the slave trade, and most, the Jamaicans are descendants of slaves who were brought by the British to Jamaica to work on the sugar plantations there. Growing sugar was one of the big businesses. Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, and Jamaica. Most of the people there are descendants of slaves who were brought to cultivate sugarcane, which was at one time the biggest business in the world, the largest profits in the early days when there wasn't much sugar available, and people became addicted to it. Today there's you can buy sugar, it's very cheap, so it's really not a big business anymore. So it was very interesting, all these different countries, Mexico, and you always hope things will get better. I know they had these severe political problems with dictators, dictators who were abusive, not really serving the people, and then you have communist rebels who have their solution is actually worse, because when the government completely takes over the country and it's very tragic. What's happened to the Cuban people. So many of them left Cuba, and then they were separated from their families and living in South Florida. That's why, when the Florida Marlins won the 1997 World Series, beat Cleveland, my team, I felt pretty bad. But on the other hand, this was actually a victory for the Cuban Americans who felt pretty bad for being separated from their families in Cuba because of politics, which is always problematic. You'll meet a lot of people from. If you go to Catholic Church, you'll definitely meet people from Latin American countries because they are Catholic. So it's interesting. They had in Paraguay this dictator named Stroessner They actually had a Japanese president of Fujiyama, I think, in one of these countries, because there have been a lot of Japanese immigrants came to Latin America. Not so much now, but years ago when Japan was a poor country, and so hopefully things will go better for them. Yeah, and with Cuba, hopefully things will open up with Cuba. They have these tremendous baseball players. Now there's more travel with Cuba. And I don't think things seem to be pretty tough in Mexico. I have a friend from Guatemala. Yeah, he said things are pretty tough, and large numbers of people still leaving because of the bad economy and bad government and so forth. Panama Canal, it'll be kind of interesting to pass through the Panama Canal. Dominican Republic, yeah, the tremendous baseball players there. And they had the very tragic thing in Guyana. Jim Jones, this crazy American, he brought all these people. He had his own church, and then it was like 900 people. It was suicide mass murder because this guy was crazy, and they moved down there. This is back in 1978 in the latter part of the year. So a lot, so there's a lot to know. They've had growing rubber in the Ford Motor Company tried to grow rubber in Brazil because it actually grows in the wild, but he tried to do it. You need it for tires as the main. The main ingredient for tires, to make tires. And it didn't work out because the trees got sick because they found that in the Amazon that in the wild the trees would grow kind of far apart. So if one tree got sick, the others wouldn't. But when they had a farm and they were fairly close together, one tree got sick, they all died. So it was really, really tragic. There's the famous scene there's a movie, Mutiny on the Bounty, when they're going around it used to be tough. You wanted to go to, in fact, in the old days, if you wanted to go from New York to California, from New York to San Francisco, you could go, this is before railroads, and going by overland would take a long time, horse and wagon, it'd take a long, long time. So they would the other option was go down to Central America and then travel by land across Panama, and then take a ship from New York to Panama, go across land, and then another ship up to San Francisco, or you could go all the way around South America, all by boat, but a long, long trip. So when the Panama Canal was built, such an amazing thing for the world because it just really made it so much easier for people to travel. Whereas now with air travel, it's maybe less relevant, but still an incredible achievement by the guys who had all the earth they had to move down there. And it was back in the 80s. Central America was very controversial. You had the leftists who were, supporting the leftist movements there, and I don't know what's going on with that now. I know that the Sandinistas got power, and U.S. President Ronald Reagan was opposing them. And then they had there's a movie about that with Tom Cruise where they were. The U.S. was supporting these rebels the Contra rebels against the Nicaraguan government back in the late 80s, and it was very complicated. They ended up funding them with drug money, which was definitely not good. Actually, they had in Colombia, actually is on both the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. Ecuador, you don't hear that much about. Bolivia. Yeah, so anyway. Oh, and then back you have the Falkland Islands, way down south, off the coast of Argentina. Still a British colony. And then back in 82, the Argentines, Argentina was having severe political problems. They started a war. So they ended up going to war with Great Britain and were defeated. So anyway, it's all a lot of interesting. There's always so much to learn. So thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you with your own interests and learning. And take care, and I'll see you next time.